So, hi there, everyone, and welcome to the podcast with Shachar in a car driving out from Cell. We had the Data and AI Executive Club Roundtable Winter Data Conference with Chris Tapp. And one of the immediate things which is on everyone's minds now with AI is like, what happens to the typical consulting job and how it changes with AI?
Thank you, Karl. I was just talking to Pascal about it this morning, that a lot of data leaders, they operate without a feedback loop. They just, in general, companies don't incentivize people to think. They incentivize people to execute. So people spend a lot of time just doing the work. They don't spend time thinking, formulating ideas, doing deep thinking. They don't get rewarded for that. We call it the execution fallacy. And what happens is that a lot of leaders end up in the situation that they know what they know, and except when they go to conferences or they go to meetups or they take some courses or training, they don't have any other context ingested into the system and inferring their ideas. When you don't do that, when you don't go out of your silo and talk to other people, you risk doing the wrong things, and you're just stuck in your own feedback loop. So that's one thing I wanted to say. Consulting companies, you'd be better if you specialize on one thing. So if you know how to do one single thing and you know how to do it very, very well, knowledge is becoming commodity, right? And everybody has access to a lot of knowledge with AI and all of that. And I think that what is becoming more difficult is, first of all, real industry insight. And the second thing that people have less access to right now is people who can see the full picture and give them an end-to-end vision of how to do things and get answers. But somebody who is a more generalist and can understand the technology, but can also understand the business, can understand, executive decision making, can understand how to frame things and communicate them in a way that makes sense. I think, unfortunately, our business will get squeezed. In fact, people are saying that consulting is dead. I see even more demand for consulting right now than ever before.
It's about domain expertise, right? And context, which is even more valuable now. And so it's a weird feeling where many of the things that we used to do before are now basically solved. While at the same time, there's so many new things that we could solve that aren't solved, but are solvable, that were not as easily solvable before. And so I think staying curious and learning and just being obsessed about your domain knowledge while having the entire technical capability, almost none of that will reach production at a worthy level of mentioning, right? So you can vibe code a back office app, you could vibe code many things, but it still takes a certain skills to get it to production grade at a reasonable scale. Provide clarity where there's no clarity, and provide ideas and hope and optimism where there's fear and uncertainty. And I think the opportunities have never been better in consulting, in the corporate world, in the SaaS space. I mean, really, they have never been better. In fact, they're so good that some people are depressed by how good it is because of how quickly you can get things done. But once you figure out that only a tiny percentage of those things people would have the tenacity and kind of the willpower to make something great out of it, then you're in good waters. If you just keeping on with the help of AI. Very interesting discussion yesterday, and one of the things you touched on is like everyone was discussing about the business value, right? I think never before you talked about how people they used to be like structured in teams where they were ticket takers. That's no longer valuable to the business. You have a very interesting take on that. Maybe you could share it.
Yeah, I think what is happening is if we look at how software development works, or you had people with the vision and the idea of what needs to be built, let's say product managers, right? And they know what needs to be built, and there are people who are builders, and they're actually the ones who know how to build it. In that case, engineers. And the role of product managers would be, in fact, to translate their vision into a set of tasks or projects that people could work on, so that eventually they achieve the end goal. And there's a lot of friction because there's a lot of things that that get lost in translation. and there's a lot of communication issues and people misunderstand. And what is happening right now is that to some extent, the people with the vision can also execute on it, right? So if you use Cloud Code, for example, you don't need to create Jira tickets for an engineer to build it. You could just tell it Cloud. Now, there's a valid question of whether that is a sufficient level of action. I'm sure it will improve a lot over time, and the way we build software is going to change, right? But I think that the point here is that people who are order takers and they just wait to be told what to do and they don't have any context, they just wait for the tasks to appear in Jira and execute on that. These people are going to get squeezed a lot. They're going to suffer because, unfortunately, the world is getting to a point that people who know what they want to do are much more in a position to execute on that. Being just an order taker, I believe it's never been good enough. To some extent, was sufficient in a lot of environments, and we're getting to a point that is becoming insufficient. And if you're just an order taker, then you don't have a future.
Do you know what? Do you know what I've been thinking of when I hear this perspective is the same applies to a lot of what we had as middle management, which was just human API, right?
Yeah.
Let me sit with the developers, I'll talk to the developers, and then I'll talk to the product people. To borrow from Office Space, from our favorite movie from, I think, was it 2099? Why can't the developers just talk to the product people? With AI, they actually can. Like, this is really one of the things that's changing is that the velocity is increased. The cognitive load is increased. We can be a bit more productive with the proper tools. But also it's changing nature of the jobs, and it takes, like, the more focused you are on the substance and the less on the noise around AI, the better off you are to do things that were just unimaginable. So the chances are there. There's some interesting aspects we'll discuss. What's your take on, like, where data governance is going?
Data governance has never been so more important. I spoke to a friend of mine. He's an engineering manager in a company, and he's leading their data infra team. And they want to build AI agents for the data team. And he said, we need context for the AI agents. And I said, yeah, of course you need context, but it's the same context you give your employees when they join, right? Like, do you have an onboarding program or something that explains, your system architecture and how it works and where's the data and what is available? Like, do you have that? And he said, no, we don't have that. So I said, so how do you onboard your employees? I mean, your team is not very small. And they say, yeah, we just bring them on and
They onboard themselves.
They figure it out as they go, which of course is not efficient, but a lot of companies got away with this.
Yeah.
And now he says, oh shit, I need to create AI agents, so I need to give them context. And I think it's actually mind-blowing that, you didn't do it for your employees, but now you have agents and you need to start feeding them with context.
Because the loop is so quick. There it'd be like taking a couple of months to recognize, maybe, whatever, it's buried into the cost. But now, like, you can immediately tell the result of this is directly visible, right? But also there's people that will err on the other side. They'll be like, let's give too much context to the agents and let's have just like everyone have access to all the data to develop agents. And that's also a fallacy. And nothing good will come out of that, because one of the things we discussed yesterday is that, security by obscurity is no longer there when you can have agents crawling, recrawling, and figuring how to crawl 24/7. So your company's data is not, the discoverability remains an issue, but the accessibility and the access controls, and now no longer is the case. I've been hearing this recently, like, everyone's vision of where AI will go, those are completing science fiction, dystopia, utopia narratives. And I think it's much more important to focus on things we can control and do right now, right? Skills that we can develop right now, and the focus on, one is, I guess it was discussing the infamous 200 use cases, AI use cases list. There was Jakob in the rounds who was like, oh, we gathered from all departments, it's 200 AI use cases. For me, the AI use cases list, I think I've been one of the people globally that has obsessed about the AI use cases list as a thing for the past, let's say 6-7 months. 6-7 months. I got small kids. So 6-7 months. 6-7. And what do you do with that AI list, right? Make it into something that actually moves the needle on the finance side, that if you invest in that AI use cases list, there's some method, some structure of thinking around what to prioritize and what to deprioritize, because the human agents will override with their human bias much of what's probably hidden as valuable input. And also someone mentioned that those 200 AI use cases probably don't even contain the ones that you should be doing because they were elicited in a way that didn't cut through, So the AI use case list, take number 2. The AI use case list probably doesn't contain some interesting use cases because organizationally, you have to think way more, I think, deeper and also laterally across the departments for where individual departments wouldn't come up with use cases that go against their very existence. That's, I think, Conway's law applies and continues to apply wherever we'll have systems and organizational units. And so that's, I think, now up to the data and AI people, and ultimately to the data people, to play a leading role with business to solve this. This wouldn't get solved fully independently. This also wouldn't get solved centrally the way you do traditional software. What do you think is different or what would you say are peculiarly different things that we do with AI projects now than, let's say, with traditional projects or traditional software development that are distinctly different than before, other than the performance of the models, but like in the approach that we as teams and humans look at these AI use cases?
Fundamentally, I don't think it's different. First of all, we talked about order takers, and I think that CDOs who just walk around the business and ask them, what do you want me to build for you? They make a very risky assumption. They make an assumption that people know what is possible, that they think about it big enough, and that they know what they want, and that they know what is going to work and what is going to move the needle. And I mean, in all of my years in the tech industry, I know that that's a very risky assumption that is almost never true.
Right.
Most stakeholders don't know, and they're not informed to the extent that, they can be, because especially if they're in the business, they don't think like tech people, and they don't understand the boundaries of what is possible. And sometimes they think up very narrowly about it, or, sometimes they cannot just imagine the things that are really possible. So I think that just going around the business and asking, what do you want me to build, is probably not the best idea. Instead, the CDOs and the people who drive this, they need to be very opinionated. They need to understand the business enough to be able to say, okay, these are your biggest challenges. That's number one. The second thing I would say is, and that's always been the case, don't just build things for the sake of building, or because you want to experiment with a cool technology, say that you're doing AI or whatever. If you're going to build something, you should know what is the problem that you're going to solve with this, or, how it is going to change something for someone, or how is it going to move the needle. And you need to have a certain level of conviction that you're doing the right thing and that it's going to work. Now, it's okay to experiment. It's okay to try things, but I see too many teams right now that just do things for the sake of doing. And that's just, in most cases, unfortunately, a waste of everybody's time.
Yes. And it's so interesting how these things coexist, right? On the one hand, teams that are empowered and can build amazing things, not for the sake of being busy, but just to move things. Like at the same time, you could say many companies would experience something that only teams experience when they get bought by PE, right? When there's like, okay, let's collapse the systems. Let's figure out if we could do the same job with less, with less people who are just more empowered, more productive. And, we're reorganized and some people would, drop off. And, we're just going to continue until, with a 20-30% efficiency per year until efficiency improvement plateaus. And that is a unique experience for companies that have healthy cash flows and healthy balance sheets, because that usually happens only after the businesses run into trouble when you get bought and have to get an efficiency improvement program. For many people, it's a complete cognitive overload, but I think the adjustment is going to happen quicker. And one of the things we discussed was like the AI firings that we're seeing, right? Some of it you shared was, can you elaborate on your thesis of like the 2019 to 21 overhiring? Yeah.
Yeah. So the whole efficiency push is something that, to be honest, I'm struggling with a little bit. And I think there's something very dangerous going on right now in the industry. So let's say you have a business that makes $100 million a year, right? And it has 1,000 people working there, just as an example.
Yeah.
And now this business is acquired by, I don't know why it makes sense to say, okay, let's do the same thing with 500. Why is that better than saying let's make $200 million a year with the same number of people, right? I think that if AI makes you more efficient, why is the right thing to get rid of half of your workforce, for example? And to me, the way I settle this in my mind is that I think that a lot of executives use this as an excuse to cover up for leadership failures because they actually overhired. They have bloated organizations. They work extremely inefficiently in first place. What they do doesn't make, in a lot of cases, they had a lot of inefficiencies working on things that don't need to be worked on, investing in things making investments that don't make sense. And what they do is they say, okay, we have AI now, so we should be a lot more efficient and we can I think that in a lot of cases, and we've seen, a few of these very recently, I think it's an excuse. It's a cover-up story. And
Right.
I think it's very dangerous because a lot of other executives are looking at that and they think our workforce is also potentially very big. We also need to do layoffs. And they're creating this, they're fueling this idea that everybody should just let go of employees for the sake of efficiency.
It is absolutely true. And I think the dangerous part is that while this is happening, you also have organizations that will struggle and will say, listen, I would be able to get efficiency with AI and just have like more top line or whatnot, but not with the same team. So ultimately what ends up happening, they kind of exchange a lot of that work for like a certain percentage of workforce and, hire almost a similar amount back within 6 months, but they're just different people. And so there's also something to be learned by both companies, individuals, consultants, software vendors about that process, because the allure and the quick solution to, your quarterly results by doing that would be for many firms just too hard to ignore. And if the gain from like the ones that really double down on like increased output and doing more they'll be a lot less, right? And they'll assume that they made the right hiring decisions to begin with and aren't inefficient with how they grew. So there's going to be pain to be had by many people and organizations. It certainly makes sense to consider all angles, right?
And I think Jakob, yesterday had a very good point on this, where he said that, some organizations have very bad processes, and what they do is they use AI to automate and sustain, their bad processes. They just do it in automated fashion, and instead of having people involved, instead of fixing their processes in first place.
If you mix good people with bad processes win 9 out of 10. Right. So the solution to bad processes is not to supercharge them with AI, certainly not from management or middle management about how things should be improved, because more often than not, in the way that I view many of these use case lists, is like basically like an options portfolio. And also there's a lot of investment. This isn't just like, let's buy everyone a $20 per month seat and then we're good, right?
The fact that you can't do something doesn't mean that you should. It's always been the case, and it's becoming even more important these days because the threshold, the bar for building things has just gone lower. Everybody can build stuff, and building is becoming easier, but building the right things is becoming harder.
Yeah, it's like, just because everyone has an iPhone doesn't mean they can be a photographer at my wedding, right? The ability to understand the domain and structure an agentic system with deep contextual understanding makes all the difference. Because if some of your staff that are empowered to be quick with AI would just produce a lot of bloat and slop and ultimately end up hurting the company more than they would otherwise do. So, meaning some of the inefficiency, when they get amplified, backfire even worse than they normally would be captured by human intervention.
Exactly, and I talked about it a lot before, but I think that building 600 dashboards is a lot easier than building 6 dashboards.
Right.
Because when you build 600, you just need working hands. You don't need to know what you're doing. You just need to build and build and build. You don't have to think. To build 6 dashboards for the business that capture everything that people need to know, you have to spend a lot of time understanding who are the users, what information do they need, what's the right way to surface that information to them. It requires a lot of work, and you have to treat it like a product, and you have to think about it in a completely different way, and that's a lot more difficult. And I am worried that actually today you have technologies and tools that enable you to build that, to spin up a dashboard with just a prompt, right? So you're going to get to a situation that organizations have 6,000 dashboards, not 600, where again, they probably only need 6. And that's where I think AI will amplify bad decisions, will amplify people building the wrong things. And it means that we need more leadership.
Yeah. Yeah, but this is ultimately, if you go back in time, this is what happens when a technology and access to technology gets democratized. You get the good and the bad stuff, right? I actually remember the time. I think I'm older than you, where you had to actually be smart to be on the internet, right?
Yeah.
And ultimately, that doesn't mean that the internet should be accessible by 100,000 people worldwide. I mean, clearly, that's completely wrong. So things similar with AI, but human judgment and leadership and the ability to separate signal from noise, unlike I would even dare to say, unlike the agile mania of 2021, this one is actually more substantial and actually has something going on for it. One thing I wanted to ask you, since you work at Meta, is like, going back 5 years, 6 years to 8 years in time, everyone was doing the Spotify model, organizing the agile teams, and it wasn't really super efficient. And back then, we were hearing that people that worked in big tech, that big tech itself didn't work according to that. Why would a mid-sized European bank, go all in on something? What was the approach at Meta, and is it really true that different teams can pick and choose what's the best methodology for their own delivery?
Yeah. So first of all, yes, every product team, there's no one process that is shared across the entire company. There were actually, at the time, there were only 2 processes that were shared across the entire company, which is the performance management process and also the pulse process, which is the evaluation of employee satisfaction and all of that. Everything else is team by team. You don't force or impose processes on teams. Teams self-organize and find the best ways and most efficient ways for them to operate and work together. I think that my view, having worked in very large companies, is that people overthink organization structures. And I'm not saying org structure is not important. It's very important. But I think that fundamentally org structure is not a solution to a problem, right? And what I mean by that is that every org structure is bad. It's just every org structure is a trade-off between a bunch of things. Like you want to have decentralized or centralized teams. Both options are bad in a way, right? Because if you're centralized, then your team may not have the business context they need. And if they're decentralized, then, you struggle to standardize things and do things in a standardized way and, to control the work and things like that. So I think that it really is just a trade-off between, and you have to decide what are the things that you're trying to optimize for at every given moment. But fundamentally, if you think what an organization structure is, it's a way to control and monitor work. And it's also a way to communicate and share context between people. And I think that Meta did treat it in that way and think about building small teams that work together so that everybody's operating with similar context. And because everybody's operating with a similar context, then people, when they make individual decisions, they would be more right. They know what needs to be done. And fundamentally, I think whatever org structure you choose, it doesn't matter as long as you're making it effective for people to share context and communicate with each other. And the moment the organization structure stands in your way and your processes stand in your way of people doing their work and being efficient, that's when you have a problem.
I think it's just two things to unpack here. There's absolutely no value in having rigid structures. I think one of the things that AI is absolutely changing is how fluid the organization becomes, where careers are not built on just hoarding information. Like you can't effectively hoard information anymore. That ship has sailed, right? And so a bunch of people are unhappy about that, whether they admit it or not. But the others that are happy, they're having a ball. They're doing great. And those are the ones that are focused on content, that are focused on output, and that really deeply care about achieving something with the work. And, there's over time, over the years, I've come to realize, people do value stability. I mean, there are some adventurers like us who we just leave for change. We just want to move, get shit going. But there's others who's like, I want to have my planned, progression. I think it's safe to say that this planned progression is largely over. This is certainly a transformation that is going to take a while, but you can see the writing on the wall. Well, it's the potential is so huge, it's almost depressing. It's so optimistic, it's almost depressing.
Yeah, I mean, if you believe that there's a revolution happening right now, be part of it. And the people who, if there is a revolution and the people who are not part of it will be left behind. So I think, instead, I would not necessarily use the word panic. I know you said use panic, like, panicking. Just say, take control over your situation.
Exactly.
Educate yourself, inform yourself, understand, play with technology, read a lot, listen to what people are saying. There are a lot of charlatans as well, and there's a lot of stuff for the sake of talking. So pick and choose what is the information that you want to consume and who are the people that you trust and listen to. But fundamentally, now is the time to make the leap, because I think you were in day-to-day Texas, right? We talked about what is happening to our industry right now. And I think it was in Joe Reese and Matt Housley's session. And one of the questions I ask people is, do you know anyone who doesn't use a personal computer today to do their job? Anyone? And the answer is, of course, not, right? Everybody's using it. If you're an artist, maybe you don't use it to do your job, but you use it to send emails to your customers and to issue invoices and to manage your bank account. Like, we all use a formal personal computer today. That hasn't been the case 60, 70, 80 years ago, right? Like, that wasn't the case. So something has changed. For young, for them, AI is a given, but for everybody else, it's a change, right? So you need to adapt and you need to adopt.
There's an observable difference that I can report on between how AI is talked about in the US and how it is perceived in Europe. Europe, it's like, oh, but what about the human element? But is it governed? Is it safe? But what? Yes, of course, this is important. But why should this be top of mind? Why is improving your product, your life, your company, your process, or your output, your productivity, or everything really, your experience, and the first things that comes to mind? But is it going to have any negative effects? This is kind of a syndrome of we're doing so well that at some point we sit fat and happy and we don't want to change. And if you have a culture of building 100-year-old traditional companies, this is certainly something that you feel uncomfortable with when, shifts like this happen, and you might miss the train, right? You might not get, or you might get onto the wrong one. So this is all understandable. But one thing I commented on, because I read the Citrini memo, right? And to me, it struck me as like a classic, it's kind of a Ricardian view versus a Hayekian view, where it is very easy for the naysayers to say what is going to get destroyed. But is it objectively impossible for you to know that you can't know what is not knowable by default, which is what will be invented and is not invented yet? That's why most of the science fiction is dystopian, because the utopian things are just only so much that you can think of, right? I still remain highly optimistic. I think this doomerism view of AI is going to take our jobs and it's going to be the third world, and human nature just doesn't work like that. And also, there's people who are actively disputing this argument that, if the cost of intelligence drops, you're just going to use more of it. It's a very likely outcome. The probability that you're using less of it because it just does something and you just drop off the map and you sit around and do nothing. On what planet has this ever happened to humans in the history? I think we're good. Obviously, things like safety and, surveillance and like misuse of AI for like various bad things should be avoided at all costs. But this is not what the Citrini memo was saying. This was saying is like, white collar, basically people who are able to think don't have a job anymore. And I just refuse to believe that this is true. Like, I think the whole narrative around it has some deeply disturbing masochistic view around it. It's just simply not true. What do you think? 1 trillion of software assets were wiped off the stock market. So it isn't nothing based off of that.
Wiped is a big question still. I don't necessarily make predictions based on what the stock market is doing, but I think that if you look at every other revolution, like, first of all, I'm very optimistic. I'm a very optimistic person by nature. If you look at every other revolution that humankind has been through, it's always been difficult. We always came out better.
100%.
So I don't have a reason I don't have a reason to believe that that's not going to be the case this time. Having said that, I also believe that it's going to be extremely difficult. I mean, look at social media, right? We've had social media for over 20 years now. We're still adapting to this world of social media and what does it mean to be so highly connected and have so much information fed into us all the time. And it changed every aspect of our life, right? Now, in a lot of ways, I think it changed for the good. I don't live in my home country and I'm so connected to my friends, to my family, I can follow and connect with people that I otherwise would have never have been able to connect with. You know, even the fact that we're sitting here right now talking is an outcome uh,
of social media, of
LinkedIn, right? That's how we met. So I think that my personal experience in my life is that social media has been a very positive thing, but it's also very disruptive. The fact that
if you were a newspaper and you didn't adapt,
yeah, and the fact that anyone can have an opinion, and the fact that anyone can have so much reach and can share it with the world with no checks and balances and with no validation and with no, and there are a lot of other things that get amplified with social media, just like things get amplified with AI. I mean, if you think of things like bullying or sexual harassment or things like that, I mean, these things existed.
And there's a dark side of social media, no question about it, right?
It's a dark side of our society. It had existed before, and unfortunately, there are ways that social media can amplify that, right? So,
Fortunately,
everything has a good side and a bad side, and I think that the AI is evolving at a pace that is almost too fast to comfort. We will have to adopt very fast and also learn very fast, not just how to use it, but actually what does it mean for us to live in a world of AI, and how to protect ourselves, and what are the bad things. But again, we've had social media for 20 years. We're still learning. So I don't have a reason to believe it's going to be fast. I think that it's going to be painful in the beginning and then it's going to get better. And you can say the same thing about the internet, right? I mean, the internet brought a lot of good to the world, but the internet also has very dark sides.
It does. But I remember that, in my mind, back in the day, you could tell that, governments were very, very slow to regulate the internet. Like, this was a wild area for a long time. They weren't on it. They were ignoring it. They couldn't understand it well enough to regulate it. Regulation attempts failed. And now I think the AI regulation is kind of a latent vengeance on not being able to regulate the internet in the first place, of some sorts, or not catching up to social media early on. And there's always going to be this friction about how much we should regulate, how much we should live and let live. I think the European perspective differs very much from other global perspectives on that. And without saying what I think is right or wrong, because everyone can form their own opinion, it is something to be said that in Europe, we are highly technologically advanced, yet slow to adapt to this AI reality. I think that is a very fair assessment. And you could go and say you want to be you want to be a correct slow adopter instead of the early on hit against the wall. But one thing is certain: this thing will not circle around us, and we cannot regulate ourselves away from being shielded from the good and the bad side. So the outcome for this, and with this I think we can conclude our 5-minute podcast that turned out to be 45-minute podcast, is that we remain highly optimistic, and we're sending you good thoughts from Salzburg, Austria.
And I think people just don't understand how amazing it is right now. I mean, what a beautiful place. We're surrounded by mountains. It's like the most scenic place I've seen. So, if you're worried right now, if you're concerned, if you don't know what to do, just get out. Just go to a beautiful place. Just chill. It's going to be fine.
Cheers, everyone. See you soon. Bye-bye.